Hello everyone, this is History 1J. Today, I will talk about the Jeju Island as an exile. A long time ago, Jeju was a place where the sinners or felons went for the punishments, since it was an island far from the mainland. For today's contents, firstly, I will compare the Jeju Island as a tour place and an exile. Secondly, I will say where the phrase exile comes from. Then lastly, I will explain two very famous people who were exiled in Jeju during the Joseon dynasty. These days, many people consider Jeju Island as a tourist attraction where people can enjoy rest and healing. In this sense, an exile to people nowadays is considered as departing from an ordinary life to a remote place where there's no connection at all, so people take a voluntarily exile. So most people in Korea have been to Jeju multiple times for a trip, but only a few of them know that it had been a place for an exile in the past. The picture on the left shows the Jeju as a worldwide tour place. On the other hand, the picture on the right shows the desolate houses in which we can feel the difference in the where people used to live or being exiled in Jeju during the past. So we can feel the impression of an exile through these two pictures. Nowadays, Jeju Island is very famous for its tour place, but a long time ago, it was a frontier and land of an exile. It began to be driven to exile when it was ruled and interpreted by the Yuan dynasty. The first record is when it was destroyed by the Sambil Cho, which was the military unit of Goryeo dynasty, while the Cho family had most of the country's power controlled by the military dictators, and ruled Jeju for about 100 years. Sending 170 servants to Jeju Island who had room for threaten the royal family or the royal authority. In Greece, an exile was practiced in the case of homicide, and in Rome, it was means of circumventing the death penalty. Then what about in Korea? An exile in Korean history was a conventional punishment forced on those who raised their own voices against the politics, mostly the Sinhak scholars. In the Joseon dynasty, Sinhak scholars were considered political prisoners because Sinhak was a Korean Confucian social reform movement. The first Korean exile in Jeju was during the Kyung Jung-hae in the Goryeo dynasty. However, people who were exiled in Jeju during the Goryeo dynasty were not the greatest in number. More people were sent to Jeju as exile during the Joseon dynasty. Jeju began to be the pronoun of exile during the middle of Joseon, when party disputes continued and political oppression intensified. There was an exile bloom, which was driven away from the nearby places and into an uninhabited island with the intention of complete isolation. Everybody, can you see this picture? No one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or an exile. This phrase from Article 9 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights demonstrates that it's a common right for every human that an exile is not a kind of punishment people should suffer from. But many people, what makes so many people supposed to be isolated from the rest of the world? Regardless of what reasons behind, it is nonetheless said. What does it mean by the word exile? An exile was not like traveling or moving to a new city or place. It was never voluntary. In fact, it was a second heavy sentence by the government where people were forced to be sent to faraway places and were never allowed to return their hometown. Jeju was a place used as an exile because the island was located far from the island Hanyang. There are many places in the world used as an exile in the past, but I want to mention two major places briefly. The first place is the Sando Island in Japan. It's an island where more than 1,200 innocent Korean citizens were exiled as laborers for mining gold and silver veins. Also, Robinson Crusoe Island in the Chile was a place of exile in the 1700s where people had to rely on hunting lobster, goats, and seals. But the most famous person who was exiled in Jeju, this place, is artist Gim Jeong-hui, who was more well known for his pen name Jusa and was an expert in calligraphy and epigraphy. He is best known for his writing style, Jusa-che, during the Joseon dynasty. The reason that Kim was exiled to the desolate island was because he was involved in a letter to the king by one officer. That officer wrote a letter to the king. There were these 3 corrupt officers, and there were false statements that Kim is the real writer of that letter. For this reason, Kim was punished for living in Jeju for 9 years. And this drawing that shows is a famous one by Gim Jeong-hui, Ase Hando. The name represents the winter scene of the Joseon dynasty. There is another very important scholar named Song Si-yeol, who was the Joseon dynasty's philosopher and politician, and used ulam for the pen name. He was exiled in Jeju Island for being involved in the political disputes, so he was no longer able to raise his voice on the political party, and this led him to the long journey in the desolate area here in Jeju. Today, we talked about the Jeju Island as an exile and who the most famous people were. I think it's also a good idea to remember Jeju Island as a history of being an exile. Thank you for listening.